Hello again, Mr. Welker. So we've been through the planning, we've been through the recruitment, and now the actual selection, which is, of course, a very exciting process. Also can be extremely time consuming, and you want to make sure during the selection process that you are using time efficiently, especially if you like to do this in a collaborative way like I do. You're going to have many people involved in the process. And then I think it is also important to stay as consistent as possible. I noticed that wasn't really part of the chapter a little bit in the interviewing questions, but I think that is extraordinarily important. Not that you can't have some ad lib time to go off in different directions during the interview or the phone interview or the reference checks, but the more consistency you have, then of course the more objective comparison to make sure that you get the right person for the job. So basically, we're just looking for the person who can meet the expectations of the job description that's been written and also meets all the minimal requirements that you have. Um, and try to do this because you know that successful individuals in the classroom are going to make for successful schools. And the cost of hiring can be kind of significant, especially like I mentioned in the time that's spent. Anymore, also, I guess if you're part of LinkedIn or you're part of Teach Iowa or whatever the payments are for some of those platforms, those things can be a little bit spendy depending on how many you hire each year. But there is quite an expenditure, and you want to make sure if you're going to dedicate that kind of resource, that kind of funding to trying to find the right person, then find the right person, right job, and the right time. So, first of all, a detailed, clear job description and that's reviewed periodically is essential. I have kind of found it, Carol, and again, because some of it lays dormant for a while when people are there for long periods of time. Even in my position, hired a superintendent, they really did not have a job description. And when I got my contract, the contract had to be completely rewritten because my predecessor had been there for 17 years, the one before him for 5, and the one before him for like 17. So lots of times when you don't have to redo that, you don't take a look at it. And those things really do need to be updated frequently, even if it seems like just an exercise in futility. Make sure you connect the essential criteria so that you get the very best person. Write clear advertisements, which we already talked about in the last chapter. Um, Make sure that when you're receiving apps, there's a holding place. Now, for us now, it is Frontline, so all of those things come to that place. We do have one person who's kind of in charge of that particular program, but all of us have access to it. So as those come in, you vet them and you have discussions with the team. Um, Generally, I believe only the administrators or the person who actually is going to make the final decision should have complete access, and then you decide who else has access. Then maybe you just print the materials you want others to have to get out. Don't forget as well, and another thing that was mentioned a little bit briefly was some applicants do like to have confidentiality, so you don't want their name out there in case that's going to have an impact on the job position that they're in currently and presently. Um, then you have selection for the interviews, who you're going to pick exactly. What I like to do is decide on, a few that are possible, send out a rubric with the essential information, those who have met the minimal qualifications, let people vet those who are going to be impacted by the position who's hired, the person who's hired in that position. Uh, Pick maybe the top 8 or 9, and then do a Skype or an interview that's technical first of all. So maybe do that half hour, 40 minutes, something like that, and then from that particular and you can have whoever you want involved in that. Then after that's complete, then pick the formal interviews for those you're going to meet in person. Once you get to the interview process, have a list of questions. Again, you're gonna have to decide whether you formally want to follow those, where every person asks the same question, all those kind of processes, so it maintains consistency. Again, a rubric I like to have so that that rubric can be analyzed and see whether it meets the person who's really in charge of making the final decision. Um, and then when you're down to maybe 2 or 3 and you're having a tough time, unless one person really rose to the top, if there's a couple or 3, then check credentials, check references, and then I always like to see if anybody has any connections where you can do some blind references, those that they haven't included at their former position. Once you've gotten all that done, now it's time to make that choice, and whether it's just unilateral or whether it is still a team decision, I guess that's up to each individual's preference. For me, I like to narrow it down until then finally it's either just 1 or 2 people. I worked with a superintendent who trusted me, and so Lots of times, like in the athletic director position or another principal position for another school, he and I and maybe one board member would have the final say after we had done interviews kind of as a team and went through that entire process. At the high school where I was hiring, generally I would have the department and the department chair help me out. We would all do interviews, both cyber wise and then formally. And then I would have that person talk to me. We'd usually narrow it down to two, and then I'd make the final choice, and I'd let them know why, and then they could disagree with me, and I'd think about it again before making the final offer. Um, then making the final offer, and knowing, of course, the salaries and the benefits and all those particular things, and seeing if they'll accept, and then of course going to the board, getting a verbal acceptance, and then taking it to the board, recommending, and hopefully, um, you know, generally they would accept the recommendations. For classified, I would simply make the recommendation, they'd accept, and then that would be it. And my recommendation to the board was basically that they're hired, so that was taken care of. Then after that, then having to speak with all those in particular those who you may have interviewed. I like to speak to them in person or by phone, make sure I get them and let them know exactly why and let them ask any questions. If they needed any assistance with further positions, because they did make our interview, the level of interview, always letting them know that if I could assist, I certainly would. We have background checks, you know that goes on. So the book again is a little bit dated in that case, but every single person needs a background check, and so before the board can affirm, the background check has to come back clean. There's a lot about applications. Again, Frontline now does that almost for us. Just pick the things you want to know and send out the way to apply, and so that the people fill that out completely. Basically, the things that are in the app are the personal demographics, the education experience, references, and then any other things that might cater completely to the position that you're looking for. I did like to use some written essays. I'd send 2 or 3 questions to those who are going to be highly considered before we do a cyber short, brief interview. And they would have to write those things. I'm looking for communication style and whether they were in line with the culture and the philosophy of the school. I've been through simulations now. Dr. Grunmeyer, of course, has the simulations that you do. Those are great. I will tell you that for teachers, hiring teachers, I would always have those who came for formal interviews have to do a mini vignette, a classroom brief lesson, and have the students also do a rubric and hand in what they thought of the teacher that they'd seen. Um, I think that's really important. When we just hired for the athletic director and for transportation director and the assistant principal, we didn't do those things. I would like to find a way to get those accomplished if we have another round, and next year we may be hiring a couple more administrators. So I want to find some ways and maybe use Dr. Grunmeyer's simulation at the very least. I see that some bigger schools have assessment centers. I think that'd be great too. Places where you come in and you actually live those things and you can see how a person acts under the pressure of the decisions that have to be made. The other thing that I didn't notice, and I don't know if in larger school districts this is done everywhere, but I did have a manual, I think I mentioned to you before, that I helped write for human resources and for hiring. And our hiring process had a couple things. One was if there was a new position or if a position was left, we actually had something that looked just like a purchase order that you needed to send in as a request for a new position or for a position to be advertised. And you had to check the job description, see if it was adequate, check anything else that you needed and send that in. Then it was advertised through our human resources department. And then when you did finally get an acceptance, a verbal acceptance, you had to send that in as a request for hire to human resources as well. So there was a particular form that we used for both of those. I'd kind of like to have those rather than just right now. I think in Carroll, you write to my secretary, ask her to make a recommendation. They write a little blurb. I think it'd be better to have a formal process and maybe put that online as well. And so maybe see if we can get that done. So again, something that came up as I was reading and something I can take forward. Mr. Welker, these are just completely great chapters. This one was rather brief, but man, had a lot of information, and I'm going to make sure I keep this book because there were some things in there I think can be incredibly useful as I go forward. Thanks again. Chapter 4 complete. Hopefully get chapter 5 done today and sent to you.